Turn up the heat because we're myth-busting oven technology with I.C.E, Industrial Coating Equipment. Owner Richard Ludwig, a 30-year veteran expert, is my special guest and here to cover all the questions you have about ovens, building them, buying them, heating them, and more. We also discuss why there's such a low inventory of used ovens and related equipment on the market today. And we touch on the problems facing variable substrate powder coating like wood and MDF, a new industry some of you may not have heard of. It's taken about a year to get him scheduled. Let's light it up. Get ready to level up your powder coater game. Welcome to Ross Coates Powder Coater Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Scott, where we interview influencers and talk about trending topics so you can grow your powder coating biz. Today's guest is a very, very busy man, and I'm so grateful that he was able to join us today. Please welcome to the show, Richard Ludwig of Industrial Coating Equipment. He is the owner, executor, planner, everything you need to get your ovens up and running. He sells new and used equipment, and you can find him at indcoating.com. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you. And you are a busy man because you just said earlier before we started the show that you pretty much do everything. So what is it that you do and what do you sell?
Well, basically, we do everything from start to finish, whether it's a small batch system, complete integrated system, robotics, pick and place units. We do all the design here. We do all the controls here. We do have a number of sources that do some of the fabrication. Years past, we used to do all the fabrication also, but experiencing all the issues with employees and different things like that, we've outsourced a lot of that just to make it simpler. And it actually allows us to handle more because now I have all these different sources rather than just relying on who I had in-house. So we can focus on the critical things such as controls and different things like that. And then we let the fabricators weld the frames and do all those other things so we can focus on what really makes the system work.
So you're out of Florida, right? You're based
yes,
out of
we were
Florida?
originally in Ohio, and then we moved, well, it's about 5 years ago now that we moved the company to Florida for a number of reasons, but yeah.
And so, you build in your shop. So your welders will build, or do you build on site when you go to, how does that work?
Well, I have a design, I do all the design work, and then I have other fabrication houses actually build the equipment, and then we ship it in sections. Okay. And then I contract installers to actually install it. Now, part of that process is, because we're working with the customer hand in hand throughout the process. But for example, I have a washer being installed in 2 weeks. So I will be out there on Monday to introduce my contractors to the customer, get them all set, make sure it's going in the right place. Everybody understands what's taking place. They will go ahead and install it. It's going to take them about a week for this particular washer. And then I will be back there to start it up and troubleshoot and make sure that the customer's happy and everybody's good to go.
And so I love this. I'm going to share your site website here. I have it. Let me get it up here first. And I have this. I do like this one section that you have on it because it really kind of simplifies designing and installing a typical powder coating or finishing system takes 16 weeks, 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I kind of like that because it really, anybody landing on your site is really going to kind of, understand the kind of time and effort it takes, and that it's not sometimes not just building a box with a heater in it, right? As simple as people
Right.
want to make that, right? So
Yeah. And of course, with the COVID and getting materials, that's thrown a wrench into everything, of course, which
yeah,
everybody's
I imagine.
experiencing.
Right.
But that's what gives us flexibility too, by outsourcing a lot of that fabrication, different things like that. I can mitigate that. Like most of
Right.
our deliveries now, the actual fabrication time, we're still able to keep it, anywhere from 10 to 14 weeks for the actual design and fabrication, and then we get into shipping, but that's a separate story.
And so who are your customers right now, or do they just vary? Are they paint companies trying to convert into coating, powder coating? Are they existing powder coaters?
It's the whole gambit. Now we're a smaller company. We don't do the monster systems.
Right.
I don't deal with the GMs and the Fords and all those other people. Typically, my ideal customer is a owner operator business. I'm usually talking to either the plant engineer or the owner or somebody therein. Typically, they're smaller companies. Most of the equipment we build kind of tops out around $1 million, maybe a little bit more for the entire package. So in general, they're smaller systems. Right. But that being said, a lot of them are, for example, fabricators that are outsourcing and they decide that they need to bring it in, or maybe they have a specific product that's been dictated to them and a specific coating for that. So they'll come to us and say, hey, how do I do this?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what it falls. And then we have the powder coaters. We have a lot of people that maybe they have a small batch system and they recognize that it's just not cutting it anymore. We need to up our game.
Right.
For example, I have a system that is going in right now, a nice batch powder coater in Indiana, and he has multiple ovens and booths and everything else, but he's got so many small parts, he realized the need to automate. So we're putting in an overhead line with a 3-stage washer, small system. It fits in under 2,000 square foot of space. And when it's all said and done, he'll have it in for under $400,000. So, wow. And he's got enough product to fill the line right now. In fact, once this goes in, he's looking at a second system. He's already bought another building because he's seeing the uptick. Yeah. But that's typically, again, it's owner operator, smaller company. And that's what I like to work with. I don't like all the politics and all those other things that you get into with a lot of the bigger companies. So when somebody calls or talking to me, I'm, the maintenance guys all over the country have my name, my contact information, because they know if they get in trouble, hey, give me a call and we can walk you through it. So.
And it sounds like you've been in the business for a while. How long has it been?
Well, it's longer than I care to admit because it means I'm getting older. Actually, I started right out of high school as a draftsman for a company.
Wow.
And we were a gold distributor for Graco at the time when that was a big deal. And we put in a lot of paint kitchens, circulating systems, and booths and things like that. And then it kind of grew because you have a booth. Now somebody wants a conveyor. Now they have a booth and a conveyor. They want an oven. Yeah. So just learned over the years, even with the programming and electronics, just through osmosis or however you want to put it, but just gain that knowledge. So it's been 40 plus years now involved in the business with probably, I think on my website, I had 150 plus installations. Is probably way more than that when you really sit down and think about it.
So what are the main components of, that you need to have for a basic oven setup? Just an oven, not conveyor, any kind of wash system. You want to talk about that? I mean, it in a sense, you're just building a box with heaters in it. But it can vary when you're going from gas versus electric versus IR versus UV. You do them all, right?
Correct. And typically, the ideal situation, if I have the flexibility to design from new, and based on the customer's product, I generally recommend a combination of infrared and convection. Now, this is in more of a process type application as opposed to batch. Batch does not lend itself well to IR.
Yeah. Yeah, we tried that. We kind of experimented when we first moved into our new shop, which was back in 2020. And we just kind of were, it's our small oven that we were messing around with. And Ross wanted to kind of see how much more productivity and, quicker heating we could get out of this small, because we've had this small oven for a long time. So like we could kind of mess around with it and know our limits.
Yeah.
And stuff. And so when you said that, I understand what you're saying with that. We did see an uptick in productivity and turnaround times and heating times and stuff like that. But yeah.
There are inherent issues, and that's why we kind of do them all, because depending on the product, if I was just running flat panels all day long, infrared would be perfect. But as soon as I put a bend in it or I start doing some other things to it, and I lose that line of sight benefit that you have with infrared, now that limits the efficiency of it.
Right.
In fact, most of the manufacturers who only do infrared, for example, they've over the years, and I've seen it much more so over the last 5 years, they've actually gone to, you could almost call it a hybrid. Because it used to be they built all the infrared ovens and there was no air circulation other than a little bit of exhaust. Now, all of a sudden, they've got ductwork in there and they're moving a lot of air, trying to help conduct that heat across the part and to minimize banding and some of the other issues you get depending on the density of your elements.
Hi, this is Ross at Maui Powder Works.
I have this problem with my finish. It's peeling and cracking, and there appears to be a white powdery substance underneath. What's happening?
Oh yeah, that's a common problem. It's called electrolysis, and in extreme weather and climates, it can ruin the life of your finishes. What we do to fix this is we install a Duralife fastener.
Prevent the early onset of coating failure with our specially designed screw cap that fits any 1/4-inch hole.
Give all your commercial and residential jobs the longest durability against corrosion in harsh environments, perfect for powder coated, painted, or conversion coated finishes.
To order your Duralife sink fasteners today, go to MauiPowderworks.com, click shop, then click Duralife. While you're there, check out our other products.
Extend the life of your finish. Let Duralife be your protector.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what my husband was saying that he's read about in regards to that is this, we used to have we have electric, just to kind of put that on the table. We tried experimenting with this hybrid model when we first moved here just to kind of see what it would be like. It didn't quite work out. We were still burning through a lot of propane. So the offset for the cost of the propane, which is very expensive here in Hawaii, a lot of my followers know that already. Just we have a huge purchasing problem here, cost overhead for that. And that's why we ended up with electric in the end. But, it just didn't work for us. But when we first built the large oven way back 10 years ago, we had this circulation system in there. But what my husband found that was when you circulated it, maybe the fan was going too fast or circulating too much. It would cause a lot of debris to kind of kick up and get into, say we were doing a flat panel or a gate or something like that. It would kick up a lot of dust and stuff like that in the oven, and it would end up in the finish as it was curing. So we decided to not do that with this new rebuild that we did here. What do you say to that? Does that happen often? What are some things
not normally
for and against that?
Not
normally.
Typically, I'm sure in your batch oven, you walk in there and, any powder that's dislodged or whatever it is, it ends up baking on the floor. Usually, because we'll get the question all the time, well, how often should I clean out my oven?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times they say, don't, because they'll go in there and they dislodge all this dust and dirt and everything else that's been packed into corners and different things like that.
Right.
And it takes them weeks to flush all that out of the system.
Right.
Now if you're really looking at a clean atmosphere, you can always put in high temperature filters on the intake side of that fan,
right,
to mitigate some of the dust and different things you create with that. And that really brings a good point too. Like, a lot of people will run into issues where they use a high velocity air seal because they're worried about heat getting out of the oven and into the building. Well, when they're hitting that freshly sprayed powder with that high velocity of air, you are discharging a good amount of that. And eventually you have a coating throughout your oven of this powder. And then you go in there, you try and clean it. Now you're dislodging it, and that creates some issues. But in general, for most applications, it's not really a problem. Now, qualifying that by, most of my customers aren't looking for a Class A finish or something like that.
Right. I think that, like, custom coaters, whether they be garage coaters just starting out or small commercial space, I don't know, small to medium size guys, or even a micro, I would consider us kind of more micro or small business. You almost have to know your part or what you're wanting to do with that oven. But it's hard when you're a custom coater, because you could do anything from a set of rims or wheels to a huge gate or railing. And, how do you build your oven around such diversity, right? Do you ever have that with it sounds like a lot of the guys that want your ovens have a specific part in mind that they're trying to, run through or batch. How do you build an oven for such variety?
Well, the key is you have to have good air movement. You have to have adjustability of your nozzles, so you don't have any hot and cold spots, things like that. And we've played with different turnover rates over the years, especially on the, a gas type oven. And we've kind of settled in around 3 to 4 air changes a minute based on the volume. Seems to be about right. Any more than that, and now you're creating a lot of turbulence in there.
Right.
Any less, and you're not moving enough air to have a good, consistent temperature throughout the oven. And that seems to be about right. Now, we can argue theory all day long, and we build ovens both ways. A lot has to do with, depending on the product, and how we're hanging it. But there's, some people say, they want all the supply ductwork in the roof and they want the returns down low. Others say, I want it low because hot air rises, so I'm going to get better distribution. I blow it low and I return high.
Right.
Either one works.
Okay.
The thing that we try and avoid the most is, because I've seen a lot of ovens where they'll have both the supply and the return in the ceiling. So what happens is now you just short circuit. So what happens is the lower section of your oven tends to be cooler by a number of degrees because you're dumping it in. And unless you have a really high velocity fan, you can't blow it all the way to the floor and then ask it to come back up to return. So typically we'll go floor to ceiling or ceiling to floor, or we'll go side to side, depending on sometimes depending on the part. If it's a little bit heavier part, we can kind of cheat and get some good advantage where we have the supply side on the entrance side of a process, and then we have the return on the opposite side. So I'm driving the heat directly in the part a little bit quicker, and then I'm allowing it to gel and mellow out on the return side. So there's some little games you can play with that, but typically if I have the ideal situation, I like to have the duct on the floor and the return in the ceiling.
In regards to like the build of the walls, what gauge thickness do you like to work with? Assuming you're using sheet metal or something, can you kind of talk about how you build out your walls and what do you put in terms of insulation and stuff like that?
Yeah, the standard oven wall insulated panel is typically a 20 gauge, either aluminized or galvanized. Aluminized is a little bit better material. A lot of ovens are built out of galvanized, and that's fine. The only issue with galvanized, especially if you use it in a heater house, is that when you hit about 800 degrees on galvanized, it crystallizes. And you can hit it with a hammer and it will shatter as if it was a piece of glass.
Oh, wow.
I've physically seen that happen. But typically aluminized 20 gauge in and outer skin or 2.5 millimeters, depending on, what steel you're using, is more than sufficient. The big issue is insulation. We use a rock wool mineral insulation on all our powder coat ovens. All our walls are 6-inch thick.
Okay.
On dry off, for economics, we'll use 4-inch. But the rule of thumb, typically, like with a rock wool, is 1 inch for every 100 degrees.
Okay.
So if you kind of use it as a rule of thumb, that gets you in the realm. And that's why we use a 6-inch, because we know that, even though we design it for 425, somebody's going to run it at 450 and in your heater house, you're hotter than that, because typically you should see like in a gas fired, you'll see a difference of anywhere from 50 to 100 degrees. Now, like our construction, all our heater houses are stainless steel on the inside. And then the exterior is, a painted, we'll use mild steel, especially with the manufacturer I use now for actually building the shells for me. We have all our exteriors painted, so it has a really nice appearance to it. Some of it they powder coat or liquid coat, but all our ovens come in, they're bright white. And then we do all the trim, the flashing and everything in whatever color the customer asks for. Our standard is like a safety orange, but we have them in blue and green and whatever you choose, depending on your company's color. So we kind of treat our systems, especially because, again, it's the owners that are buying it, but we look at it as a showcase. In fact, we have a customer here in Florida that we just put a system in. It's all white with all red trim, but they're a high-end electrical enclosure builder for custom distribution, electrical distribution panels, things like that. And they have people through there all the time. And they actually painted the floor in the building white.
Oh my! So they're proving a point. They're making a point, right? Yeah.
But they, and then they had, all our washers are stainless steel. I don't do anything in mild steel.
Here's a message from today's sponsor.
Roscoe here from Maui Powder Works. We've been providing customers with high-end custom coatings for over 20 years. We love the powder coating business. Making auto parts, patio furniture, and stuff beautiful for our customers is the fun part. As you know, the hardest part of any job is getting parts prepped for finishing. At times, this means removing tough industrial OEM coatings, which can take hours, if not days, of chemical stripping and sandblasting. Our business was revolutionized when we discovered the great strippers from Benco Sales. Their customer service folks asked the right questions and recommended a stripper tailored for our needs. Give them a call today at 1-800-632-3626.
Get a free Benco stripper t-shirt when you mention Roscoe.
Can we walk back just a second on the using galvanized sheet for your ovens? One of the questions my husband wanted to ask was that he read on the internet that, if galvanized gets to like 400 degrees, it will off-gas some kind of like hydrochloric gas. Can you myth bust that, or what? Have you heard anything about that?
I have. I think I read it somewhere, sometime. Again, I know you have a change in the material above 800 degrees. And I've seen some places that recommend you don't take it over 600 because of the molecular change in it. But to unequivocally state that, yes, it does, or I really couldn't tell you.
Hard to say. Okay.
I think, a lot of these things get started because it's a sales pitch for somebody. Well, they're using galvanized, but we use aluminized. And aluminized is slightly more expensive. And it actually does have a nicer appearance than the galvanized. But there's a lot of ovens built out of galvanized, and I haven't heard of any issues other than, like I said, when you get into higher temperature. But I would guess that might be more of a sales pitch as opposed to any hard science to it. But again, I'm not an expert on metals.
Right. Yeah. So on byproducts of propane, one of the reasons why we didn't get into, aside from the cost of propane here in Hawaii, one of the concerns we had was carbon monoxide and capturing the water, or making sure that the water is, you have a water trap on your propane. Are there any downsides? I mean, how much of a downside or a con is that when you're, trying to decide between propane, gas, or, or infrared or electric?
I've never really heard of any real issues. Again, even if you had a little bit of moisture in the propane with the temperatures you're running, you're going to boil all that off. Now there may be, and I've only seen this in 40 years, I would say maybe 3 different times where, because sometimes in a process system, they'll use a combination dry off and cure oven, and they'll run the washed parts in the same atmosphere as the color. And like I said, 3 times I've seen it where there was a slight blushing of the finished color because of the additional moisture in the oven because of the wet parts coming in. Now, I preface that by saying it was actually an open oven as opposed to having a dividing wall or different things like that. Because to keep costs down on our smaller systems, we actually do a combination dry off and cure, but it's a completely separate chamber. And we just circulate the hot air in, and then we do have it return through the duct, but it never is actually in the atmosphere of the cure oven just for that reason.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And then,
okay. That
when you
sense.
compare electric, or natural gas to propane, propane, the heat coefficient of propane is about 2.5 times what natural gas is. In other words, for every 1 cubic foot of natural gas is typically about 1,000 BTU, depending how they mix it at the supplier. Propane on average runs about 2,500 BTU per cubic foot.
Okay.
So there is, when you start looking at the numbers, there is an offset, because you're getting a higher heat coefficient, so it does gets a little bit closer to natural gas, even though it's more expensive, but natural gas is still the best way to go.
On the BTU and trying to figure out the capacity, the burner capacity that you need with BTUs for a specific size cubic space, how do you go? What are some of the things that I'm assuming you have a formula, right? When someone comes to you,
it's one that and what I do is I use multiple calculators online just because it's easier than
Okay.
But there's a number of different factors. It's not just the size of the box. In other words, to go and calculate your required BTU, first of all, you have absorbed energy, and that's in the product itself. So on average, are you running 1,000 pounds an hour? Are you running 5,000 pounds an hour? That's the first component of that calculation.
Okay.
Then secondly, you have surface losses, because every side of that box has an inherent loss in it.
Right.
And which again is why we go with a 6-inch insulated panel as opposed to 4. For example, say you have an operating temperature of 400 degrees, a 4-inch panel will radiate 15 watts on average per square foot. A 6-inch panel is less than 10. It's actually around, I think it's around 8 watts. So just in the thickness of the panel, you have half the heat loss. Especially when you get into larger ovens, that becomes a large number for sure. And then I mentioned the ventilation. Well, then the third component that goes into that is your ventilation loss. And that's usually your highest consumer is what you have to exhaust. Now, if you're running solvents, code dictates how much air you have to exhaust as a minimum. Which typically on average, it's 10,000 CFM per every gallon of solvent that enters that on average. For powder, you just have what's required for turnover rate and really like what we do in all our ovens is I put all of the exhausters on VFDs, variable frequency drives, so I can change the volume. And typically what we'll do is we'll set that exhaust up to maintain a slight negative in the oven, just so I'm holding the hot air in, but I don't want it so much that I'm pulling a lot of cold air in. So we'll put it out so we can control that volume of air. And of course, with powder, we don't really have any nasties or VOCs that we really have to worry about.
Right.
So that kind of helps us with that. So the exhaust is balanced out. Typically when we go in, we'll start up the oven and I'll get it running and we'll get good heat and cycling. And then I usually recommend wherever they're at that they bring in a boiler person or a HVAC house, and they'll put all the meters on it and they'll get it all balanced out and adjust so that we get maximum efficiency of the burner and making sure they're not getting any buildup of carbon monoxide or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we put the exhauster on a VFD. That gives us that flexibility. Now in some bigger ovens, because by code, you have to turn over the air in the oven so many times before technically you're allowed to put gas to it. So there is a purge cycle that by code you have to go through. And typically they like to see about 10 minutes. Now, if you have a large oven, that means you need a pretty large exhaust fan. So what we'll do to reduce the amount of purge time, we can put a bigger fan in. And then once we get through the purge, then we can slow it down with the VFD. So we're not pulling all that extra air out. So that's another reason it gives us flexibility. Or sometimes they'll use a 2-speed motor. Well, they'll run it on high, for the purge cycle, and then they kick it down to a lower speed during the actual process. So there's some games you can play there too, just to reduce startup time or loss of energy, just because you're dumping so much hot air out of the building.
Let's switch gears a little bit because I mean, this is kind of triggering me to think about maybe the future of ovens, right? And where we're going, especially with a lot of talk about climate change and changing the economy to more circular, more, I see a huge upside for powder coaters in general, just because of the low VOC or VOC free powders that we offer in terms of coatings. But then the other side of that is how much are we going to, how much is the powers that get, like the change of wanting us to use more electric versus less gas and propane. Where do you see the marketplace going in terms of powder coating ovens, or do you? Yeah,
it's really hard because there's so much static, as I like to call it.
Yeah.
And it's just who's behind pushing what at the time. Everybody's saying electric, but it is a very inefficient form of heat.
Yeah.
And then you talk about rolling blackouts and different things like that. And, there's only so much that the power grid can support. And then you have everybody with electric cars. And, in 40 years, I did have one customer who switched all his ovens from gas to electric. But it was a big company. And the reason was because the electric company gave him such a subsidy because they actually put a whole substation on their property.
Okay. Just for him. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I get that. I see that maybe happening in the future.
Yeah.
I just, and I hope to have her on the show. We had another, I attended a webinar where the presenter actually did a test within her own company. They do produce ovens, and where she was kind of addressing some of the protocols that come with the climate change directives, and how they stood up versus, electric versus infrared. And it was a fascinating.
Oh, you're speaking of a convection type as opposed to infrared then?
Well, yeah, she was. Yeah, she was comparing
compared to electric infrared.
And not only that, but she was taking the directives that are coming out of the EU and some of the stuff they want to pass legislatively here, and saying, how practical is this, right? How is it going to affect our industry, which I thought was really forward thinking, to kind of just take that and just try to apply it. So it was an interesting topic, and certainly needs more exploring, because her experiments were sort of just baseline, right? Just general baseline. There wasn't, she tried to be as technical as she could with what was given on the, on what they mean by these new laws and stuff that they're wanting these manufacturers to try to be 0 point or less, having less demand, or, how are they going to work this in with their businesses, because so much of our business is reliant on that. And so I was surprised, for us being electric, I knew that our output or our demand was actually going to be kind of higher to begin with. It was like a significant, huge gap or range for infrared, in its less capacity in terms of electric versus electric. But, I do see, I sometimes wonder how they navigate this, because they're demanding this one thing, these directives. And then at the same time, there's only so much you can do with electric, right? And like you said, the demand on the grid. Do you want to, I don't know if you want to add any other comment to that, but there's a lot to explore, I guess.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I always love the phrase, the problem's not the problem, because it rings true almost from top to bottom. If you look at it from, for example, just take that scenario with electric. The technology should be more focused on lower bake temperature powders and different things like that, as opposed to limiting how you heat it. Now, because it takes a lot less energy to heat an oven to 250 degrees compared to 450 degrees.
Right.
And at the same time, again, most of our systems we build with a cooling tunnel. So now, I'm spending all this energy to heat it up, and then I'm spending more energy to cool it down, where the real solution is, boy, if I could just drop the temperature, I'm saving
right.
on both ends. And
so then that's the powder supplier side, right?
If I was a powder manufacturer, that's where I'd be going.
Right. Yeah.
Because you have cost savings all the way around. And
right.
You can even charge a little bit of a premium for the lower bake, because you can justify that because you're saving it in the long run in utility costs and OSHA standards and,
right.
hot parts around operators, and it just goes on and on and on. So that's where I look at the problem's not the problem. They're just trying to put a Band-Aid on it and make everybody feel good, but they didn't really create a solution.
Yeah.
And because there's nothing wrong with infrared. There's nothing wrong with electric heat. It's it
Well,
just becomes mind-boggling because you have people making decisions that have never owned or run a business or been in manufacturing, and they're trying to dictate how to do it.
yeah, and I've said this on the show before. Last year, or actually it was earlier this year, went to Powder Coating Week and in Orlando, and one of the keynotes was I can't think of his name right now, but he was from Arkema, and he was presenting. His keynote was around the dirty side of our businesses, right? And I found it ironic because because they're a chemical supplier for powder suppliers, right? And the results were from Axel Nobel and how they identified that it was the manufacturers that had to clean up their side of the business, not necessarily. It was like they were just pointing the finger at us, right? To clean up our side of the business. That's easier said than done when you just kind of pointed out how simple it would be if they could just work on the formulation enough to where we could use low temp. And so I found it kind of funny that the first thing they go to is just to point the finger somewhere else rather than look, of course, according to their research, right? And stuff that the dirty side of the business, or the ones that need to clean up their act, are actually people like us, not the powder suppliers. And I just found that just too simple too simple to point the finger somewhere else, rather than take up the staff and say, let's all work together as a group, right? I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's why I don't go to too many of those seminars anymore, because I always get myself in trouble. My favorite was always when they talk about, we're 98% efficient in our application, and by reclaim and all these other things, and real world, maybe in a lab, yeah, but not real world,
right?
And not all the associated problems that come with that as you continue to, the one thing. And I do this a lot with new customers, because, we want reclaim. I said, that's great if you're a high volume, but the systems we're putting in are not high volume where you're going to see a true benefit to reclaim. And then you start to explain to them, well, technically, if you read all the data, you're only supposed to reclaim powder 3 times before you throw it away.
Right.
So if I mix and reclaim with my virgin powder, how do I know which particles were in there only twice, and how, so how do you sort that out?
Leads to a lot of problem solving and chasing tails, right?
Yeah. And then you're packing out filters, and your efficiency's dropping because the powder doesn't hold as good a charge after it's been sprayed a number of times, and you go on and on and on. And unless you're real world, like you and everybody else out there is actually powder coating, you don't understand. It all sounds good as a sales pitch, but in reality, it doesn't work that way. 80%, 85%, it's doable. But this whole 95 to, come on.
Hey guys, we never thought the Powder Coater podcast would take off as well as it has. The level of engagement and bringing custom coders together has been wonderful and worth every late night edit and weekend recording.
Whether it's product features, smart business strategies, or custom coder interviews, we are encouraged to continue to bring great content. That's why we're going to show you how you can help us just a little bit more by sponsoring the show for as little as $1, $5, or $10 per month.
Just go to rosscoat.com page and look for the Become a Patreon button in the upper right-hand corner of the page. Once you're there, you can scroll to learn more about our goals and mission, grow our community by bringing you new episodes and news each week.
With every sponsor level, you get something for yourself, too, to guarantee your success as a powder coater. We are so thankful for you and enjoying the content we bring you each week, and hope you show your support by becoming a sponsor. And level up your powder coater game.
But again, a lot of that is just sales and just trying to get that marketing edge. But yeah, with the electric, I don't know, because again, the other technology, UV curing, because again, but you still need a certain amount of temperature to really get it to flow, which they don't really explain. And ultraviolet it's used a lot of energy to power those lamps. So a lot of issues.
Right. Yeah. And now tell me more about UV, because are they using infrared or UV because you do have a site, a blog on your website, and it does talk about powder coated MDF and stuff. Are they using UV or infrared on those lines? Or you can use both. Okay.
Well, you have to use both.
Okay. Because of the moisture level in wood and stuff like that, right?
Well,
is that what it is?
And I don't know if you had a chance to read the whole blog, but it really talked, because what happens is, about once a year, one of the magazines will produce an article about powder coating MDF. And I get flooded with phone calls from everybody. Oh, I want to powder coat MDF. I want to,
Yeah.
And then I have to go through the whole explanation that it was a 2-year process for them to be able to do it with the coordination of their powder supplier and their equipment supplier and, their material supplier and all these different things. And basically, what happens is, first of all, you need to use a higher grade of MDF right off the bat, because it's got to have the better resins in it that can take the temperatures.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to maintain a certain humidity level within the board so that you can attract the powder to it, so you benefit from the electrostatic process.
Right.
So sometimes they actually will build a humidification chamber on the line, like in a process, mm-hmm. where they can actually mist, or basically sending the product through a cloud. And we used to do that quite a bit back in the day. We were doing a lot of electrostatic coating, liquid of stain on wood cabinets and things like that, where you'd actually run the board through a misting chamber, mm-hmm. just to get some moisture and humidity to attract, electrostatically. So, but what they do is then they preheat the board a bit so that they get the powder to start gelling right away. Then they hit it again with infrared after it's been sprayed, to get it to flow, and then they hit it with the UV to cure it. See, and it's a special powder because it won't cure without the UV.
Right.
And again, what inherently the problem with that is if you have any complex parts, if it doesn't see the UV, it will never cure.
Yeah, it's a lot of problem solving. Yeah.
So, and again, if you have a high volume line, if you were a huge cabinet manufacturer and you ran hundreds and hundreds of doors, and in fact, on the used market for a while there, when they first came out with powder coating MDF, everybody rushed out and bought systems.
Right.
And they found that it wasn't production stable. And that, we had 3 or 4 of them right off the bat that were offered to us for like pennies on the dollar that people just wanted to get rid of because they just get it out of our plant. It was a nice experiment, but but again, they were smaller manufacturers. You get big guys and they have the resources to really do that and do that production control and have people to maintain all those different facets. Yes, it is a viable option, but not for the average small coder.
Yeah, I agree with you. I did read an article recently of a powder coater out of New Mexico that had just made it a big announcement that they were jumping into that. And I'm like, we did have someone from IFS come out and do a show with us a couple years ago now. And, he kind of walked through the process. Basically, we kind of skimmed through the basic process, but there's just, it's a lot to think about. It's a lot to get into. I think, what is it? The minimum to jump into it is 150,000 or more.
Oh, that would be on the way, way low end. I would
Low
think.
side. Yeah. Well, they're
Way,
scaring
yeah.
people with the pricing, right?
Yeah.
So like already people are like, what, just to get into that. So, um, it's not that, I mean, obviously people are, I don't know of any yet, but if they are coming out, I'd love to have them on the show. But we've been kind of watching a couple of the companies that have said that they're getting into this, powder coaters, custom coaters. So I'd like to have them come on when they kind of get it up and going. It seems like it could lend itself to, but it could also demand a lot of people for that business, which is on one hand good because you're hiring more employees, you're growing your business and stuff, and there certainly is a serious demand, at least maybe not up front, but in the future, to be one of the only coders in the world that could do this and do it successfully. So, I mean, you're talking about a whole industry, but even when we were, on the Powder Coating Institute, I was actually joined their subcommittee on that. And even the people that had a stake in the game on that committee couldn't even agree about how to market themselves properly, or what audience were they going to talk to first? Do they talk to the powder? Do they talk to the cabinet manufacturing people, or do they talk to other people within their industry? So it's kind of a twofold problem, because you have to kind of create that demand, and then yet also be having coders and applicators able to do it perfectly, right?
Yeah. Well, see, the other problem you get into too is you look at the economics. Me personally, I think they're targeting the wrong market. Because MDF, it's a cheap cabinet.
Right. To begin
People
with,
buy it
right?
because it's inexpensive. So your margins are going to be very low. So it's going to be hard unless you're a very large volume to do that. And that's why it makes it so cost prohibitive. And if I'm buying a high-end cabinet, I'm not buying an MDF board because it's powder coated. I'm buying a high-end solid wood cabinet that I know if I put a screw in it, it's not going to pull out and crumble.
Right. And the natural woods have their beauty within themselves, right? Like cherry or maple or, and I get the whole maple thing, because I used to, refinish furniture and wood cabinets all the time here locally. And, there are some downsides to staining walnut. It's a common wood, but it's also a very hard wood to stain perfectly and evenly because of the way that it's designed, or the way that it is, right? It's
right, the way it grows,
whereas cherry's a little bit more forgiving and stuff. So it's on one hand it's great. I could see it changing the world in terms of its idea, but at the same time there's this selling side to it that is just I'm not sure custom coaters or manufacturers in general have the they have to kind of mow down the forest to get to the customer, right? Like kind of like what you were saying, who's going to want that?
Yeah. If you're, again, I just don't see the margins in there large enough to be successful doing it on a regular basis, unless it's just such a high volume where you can get your part per piece down, to a very small number.
Right.
Because again, it's MDF board, and then right off the bat, you're paying more for that board because you got the better resins and different things like that. And you have to treat it now. So there's all those other processes. So, where that tipping point is to where you say, well, why aren't you just doing it out of wood instead of MDF? Now I could actually see a much better application with different woods that were difficult to stain, or like a poplar, which doesn't have a nice appearance in general, to where you would paint that. The other issue that everybody ignores too is that, when you powder coat, unless it's a flexible type powder, you're going to get cracks in the cabinets when you hit it with something, because it's going to dent. And we all know, take a piece of, that's something that, for example, even the the manufacturers of T-tops for boats. Like right now, the hot thing is everybody's powder coating their T-tops.
Yeah.
Because everybody wants it to match the color of their boat or whatever.
Right.
But they're quickly finding, and I've had a number of people that I know in Florida here, they have boats. And the first thing they say is, I wish I'd never got a powder coated. I should have just stuck with stainless or aluminum and just been done with it, because if you dent it, now you got a crack and now you got this chip.
Right.
It's just a nightmare.
Right. Yeah.
So what happens with, you got this beautiful kitchen you put in, it's all powder coated MDF, and you hit it with a pan or something like that. And all of a sudden you're in that same situation. It's not going to be easy to repair.
It's true. And also with regards to poplar or using walnuts or some of the harder woods, natural woods, is, and you're dealing with an extreme variable in terms of how they were grown. If it's an imperfect, maybe it's a drier year, there are so many variables within the wood itself, right? Because it's a natural product that, I don't see how you could control that. It's hard enough to control with just paint staining, right? By hand or with a spray booth. Yeah.
And then throw into that end grain.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You cut a piece of MDF board and that cut is not smooth on the ends.
Yeah, true.
So now that's a whole nother process. And usually what they're doing is they're using an adhesion promoter, different things like that, trying to fill it, almost like a primer, or they're trying to load up those edges enough where it'll flow out and cover it.
Or they're gluing an end to it. So there's glues involved and stuff like that. Yeah. It's a big problem to solve, and with many, many facets and angles and sides and stuff that, on the other hand, if they could successfully answer all those questions, it's a game changer and certainly would fit in with, being more efficient and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, interesting talk today. I hope we've myth busted some of your questions. I know I wrote down lots of notes. I can't wait to share it with him, because a lot of what he's always pondered, has been answered today by you, Rich.
Oh, I appreciate that. But, that's really part of the bulk of the calls I get are from people that are new to powder coating or they're just trying to get into it. So a lot of time the first conversation is just more of an education about what are you trying to do and why, and trying to understand it's not that difficult. We're not building rockets here, but there are certain things you have to inherently be aware of, and that could trip you up, But I find that, I tell most of my customers, I say, after you've had whatever piece of equipment I sell you for 6 months, you're going to know more about it than I ever will, because you're using it every day. So that's the way I approach it, is just kind of a tool, and then you can make it do whatever you want, really. And I've been in some places that they do a phenomenal job. And then I've been in other places that, let's just say not so much.
It's true. I think that there is such a variety in terms of quality output, that I've seen just in like some of the products that I have. I bought a display wall, and the components, the hanging parts, they're all powder coated and stuff. So I was kind of inspecting that and stuff. I mean, for what you're getting, it's pretty good, but I noticed it's not the kind of high quality that you would want out of someone that's doing a rim or some kind of automotive part. It's certainly different, right? So, it's a big, big world out there in terms of powder coating and what you can get or who you work with, right? To get that. So,
I'll tell you, after being in so many places, the first thing I walk in is whether it's clean or not.
Yeah, that's a lot.
I mean, I know right off the bat what I'm within 30 seconds.
Yeah.
I can tell, what they're producing and the type of expectation they have and their customers have. And I will, if you want a good product, you got to keep the place clean.
Yeah, it's true.
I had one customer that he only had 8 customers, and each one was set up for coating on a different day or different time. and the parts had to be there the week before. And he would code them and turn them around. And then Friday, he only worked half a day on Friday. They shut the system down and cleaned everything top to bottom, so that Monday when they came in, they were ready to fire it up. And very successful.
Wow.
And he never had to negotiate price, because he'd tell them, he'd say, well, if you want to try somewhere else, that's fine. I'll keep the slot open for you for 30 days. After that, I'm filling it with somebody else. And in 30 plus years, he only lost 2 customers.
Wow.
And they both wanted to get back to him.
And there was somebody else that filled the slot.
And he said, so was it worth the 5 cents you saved on a part?
Right.
But he was comfortable with what he was doing and confident. Yeah. And he did a wonderful job and had a nice business with very little headaches, not scrambling around.
God, if I only had to bill 8 people, that'd be nice.
Well, he said the biggest thing was he trained them all that don't drop stuff on me at the last minute and say you have to have it tomorrow. In 30 plus years, he said he only turned the system on twice on a weekend. And because all his customers knew if he had to turn it on because they needed something, it was 3 times the price, no negotiation.
Oh, wow.
But
there's
again,
a lesson in that. Yeah. I wish I could charge that,
Yeah. But he said what happened was they didn't ask him because they already knew the answer. And somehow they were able to get the parts to him on time. And somehow, because his big thing was your lack of organization isn't my problem.
True.
And we're in a society now where, and we all, because we want to have good customer service, we want to take care of our customers. So we agree to that. So we actually train them to abuse us, is the way I put it.
We do. I think that's a really good point. Where's my phone? Hold on. It's probably, it's Tiger Drylac.
Oh, okay.
I wonder what that's about. It's okay. He can leave a message. I think that, we're kind of at that point where it's like, we're trying to train up our customers, especially the one I had this yesterday. Somebody wanted a quote over the email with no pictures. I know the piece is 10 years old and it was already previously powder coated. And I'm like, you know what? I'd love to help you, but, he didn't know it was like patio furniture. So, there's some stuff that I need to understand first. I can't just give you a quote over the phone. As confident as I am about quoting, there's some, and I'm like, well, why don't you call somebody else? Right. And I haven't heard back from the guy, but, it's really just understanding your business as much as you can, right? Or your customers, right? One final thing. I mean, we didn't touch on used versus new, but I'm thinking about it now. Mm-hmm. What are some, is there anything to know about new versus used and why you would want to buy new or used, right?
Well,
Hey, Powder Coating Nation, Kim Scott here. It's time to grow your business with us. The Powder Coating Near Me directory can get your powder coating shop the real exposure it needs to succeed when you list your job shop today. Join a list of top custom coaters who've listed their credentials to be discovered by the customers who are searching for powder coating every day. Head over to powdercoatingnearme.com, click Add a Coating Shop, and start creating your very own page for free. Yes, free. You can add your logo, name, address, phone number, map listing, social media links, photos, video, and more. When you submit your listing, we'll get notified and approve you right away. Now you can add all the categories you specialize in and even add your own tags. Get the SEO and valuable backlinks your company needs for authority and getting ranked. You can even use the link you create and share it to your favorite social media profiles to build legitimacy as a custom coder. What are you waiting for? Become part of the largest consumer search directory in powder coating in the world, all for free. Find and click the link in this podcast or go to powdercoatingnearme.com to get started growing your brand today.
right now, there is very little, if any, good quality used equipment. I have a couple batch ovens, I think, that are available right now, and a couple other small pieces. And I network with one or two other used equipment dealers. There's quite a few of them that I don't work with for a number of reasons. But the ones I work with, we only even consider equipment that's A and B quality. Mm-hmm. I don't want the thing that the company was going under for the last 3 years and they didn't maintain it.
Right.
Or you open a control panel and there's wires jumped all over the place. If it's a mild steel washer, we don't even consider. If it's more than a couple of years old, there's a lot of things like that. The biggest issue, because we get calls all the time, persons say, "Oh, I have this system and I want to modify it," or I found the system, but it's too small for us, but we want to change it.
Yeah.
And right away, it's like, okay, they want to add a foot to the height and whatever else. And you say, well, now you're adding all those additional nozzles to the washer. The pumps probably don't have the capacity because they weren't designed to handle the extra load. Your oven was, so it just exponentially. And then you figure the labor to modify all that. And you quickly approach the cost of new for a system that's less efficient that you're trying to make fit your application.
Right.
Now, I mean, we do come across where it's a really nice fit, almost identical to what the guy needed. And it's more of a conveyor rerouting change to make it fit in the area he has allocated, as opposed to modifying the whole thing. Or there have been a number of times where we find a system that the washer's really nice, and then we'll actually rebuild the entire oven. We'll just use the oven panels because they're all interlocking. We'll just pick it like it's a big puzzle. And if I have to add a couple panels, I will, and piece it together that way. So there are some advantages, but that actually is what drove me to slide out of manufacturing myself and start working with outsourcing a lot of the fabrication. Because typically with our value line series, as we call it, we can do it for 20 to 30% less than the average cost for a new system right now, which puts you only slightly more than what a used system would be. So for a little bit more money, you can have a brand new system with full warranties and everything else. Because that's the other thing with the used system. And we were a little bit different, because when we would put the used system in, we would start it up and we'd make sure we got product off the line. Now, once I did that, then it was on the customer. But in the course of starting it up or something like that, if I had to replace a pump, that was on me. If I had to rebuild a heater house, that was on me, because I sold the customer a working system. Where there are some houses out there that, well, this is what you bought. We just took it from here to here and put it back in. Or, if this needs fixed, it's on you. So there's some pitfalls. The one thing I tell everybody that's looking at used equipment is jump in a plane, go look at the equipment, so you know what you're getting. And the other thing is, if you're doing it, make sure whoever takes it out is the one putting it back in, because you'll take it out a lot differently if you know you have to put it back together.
And what does that say about the industry too? I mean, does that mean that there's a lot of demand for equipment, that we're growing in an industry?
No, it's really hard to say. There's just, because there hasn't been a lot of business expansion, there's just not a high volume of equipment out there. And when you figure an average life of, 20 to 25 years before it's really worn out.
Right.
When you haven't had that business expansion for so many years, and there's not a lot of companies going out of business or consolidating or different things like that, well, where do you get the used equipment from? And what's left is what has been worn out, and the company either closed or they retired it. For example, I had one customer that he had a system that was working, and he called me about a new system, and it was going to be about a little over $500,000. And we talked for a while, and then about 2 weeks later, I follow up with him, and he says, Rich, he said, I'd really love to do it because I know it would improve our efficiency a bit. He said, but I have a hard time spending $500,000 when I'm going to be retiring in 2 years, and my kids don't want the business, so I'm going to sell it. He says, I'm not going to recoup all that. He said, I'm better off taking that $500,000 and putting in my retirement account. And I'm like, I would do the exact same thing. I hated to say it, but I had to be honest, right? I mean, if I was in that position, that money's going in my account, right?
Yeah.
So then when we came up with our value line series, I called him back, and this is about a year later. And I asked him, I said, if I could have done the system for, around 350, would you have done it? And he paused and he said, yeah, I would have done it. He said, because I ended up putting over $100,000 into my existing system just to keep it going for the next couple of years until I could sell the company. He said, so if I take that minus the additional, he said, now I would have had a newer system, which would have been considered more of an asset,
right?
Rather than just, he said, now the economics of it justify it.
Yeah, because the selling price he couldn't have gotten more,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of nuances to it all, and there is no right or wrong answer. Some people.
Yeah, I think a lot of manufacturers are just hanging on to stuff, right? They're not, there's timeliness, right? Where they've worn out their system and they have to do it. But then that used equipment may not even be worth it. They just throw it out or whatever. People are just kind of running it to the end.
And because it's so old, a lot of we have one customer that we're waiting for them to approve it. It's a system that's about 20 years old. The problem is they can't get the replacement parts for it because everything's newer, and they look at the cost, try and modify it to accept the new style burner or this or that, and it just doesn't justify it. So then they start calculating in downtime and different things like that because they don't have what they need, and time they spent scurrying on the internet trying to scrape up something that'll fit. It's just the economics overall of it. And that's what drives some of that.
Yeah, that doesn't sound fun at all.
Like even with batch systems, I could probably sell every 8820 that I could get my hands on because I get calls every week for people looking for a used batch oven. But the problem is, for most small coders and custom coders, why would they ever get rid of that batch system? Even if they automate, I'm putting an overhead line. I'm keeping that batch because if I get that call at the last minute, I can spray something and throw it in that oven and get it out. I can turn it around in an hour if I have to. But if I put it on the line, it's going to be a couple hour process. I got to go in and set up all my guns, or I got to play around with it. So that's why you don't see a lot of good used batch equipment on the market, because why would you get rid of it if you have the space for it?
Yeah. If anything, we're just going to keep adding. We have 2 ovens right now, a large one and a small one. And we've always wanted a medium-sized one because there's always, we probably wouldn't even use the medium one that often unless we had a bunch of small stuff that, would be easier simply done in a medium-sized oven. But we're turning around so fast that I don't see that necessarily happening. But with the medium size, I can see where that would help our contractor market a little bit, small contractors, because they always have some long part that's too small for the big oven, for the small oven, and too large for the big oven. And then we have to I feel like we have to kind of price gouge them a little bit just because we got to turn the big oven on,
Yeah, and especially where you're at, because you are more sensitive to the utility portion of that.
Yeah. Right.
Because, I always jokingly tell, most, I don't know if I should get an 8810 or 8815. And I always tell them, I've never in 40 years had a customer tell me his oven's too big. Because as soon as he puts it in, somebody, you put the 10-foot oven and somebody comes to you with a 12-foot oven, In fact, we get calls all the time, how can I add 3 foot to my oven?
Oh, I know.
And it's like, well, now you start getting the economics and the efficiency of it and heat loss and on and on and on. And it just.
Yeah. And we went actually 1 inch longer than 20 feet just because there's always some guy who, and then we can actually do 23 feet diagonally if it's a small, if it's a long linear piece and it doesn't, it's it's got a thick wall enough to where it doesn't bend too far, you know. It just, yeah, there's always somebody, but we have, we're waiting for that one job to say, well, it's 25-foot sections. Okay, we can build out an addition to that and make it work, or 30, maybe 30 feet as well. We're waiting for that one job to make it worth our while, right? But until that happens, it's pretty much 20 feet.
Yeah. Which handles the bulk of the product. I mean, that is a nice size. I'll get calls. I just had one not too long ago from a guy, and he says, well, I'm in a car club, and, we want to powder coat our car frames, and, I'm looking at buying a system. And I asked him, well, is that his business? No, we're in this car club. And I says, okay. I told him, I said, just go out and spend.
Wrong answer.
I said, go out and spend the $500 and get your frame coated and be done with it. No, and I told him, I said, look, if you really want to buy it, I'll sell it to you. I said, but I don't want you calling me in 6 months because your wife's divorcing you because you mortgaged the house to buy this powder coat system. Got no product going through it, So that's the other thing I always try and educate the customer on too, is because and this happens quite often. I have fabricators that'll call me and they'll say, I think I have enough product. I can probably fill the line for like 3 days a week. And then I'm figuring I can do other coating the other 2. And I asked him, so where are you going to get this other coating from? He said, well, there's some other fab shops that, I think I could do coating for. And I'll just ask them a question. I said, well, you're a fab shop too, right? And they say, yeah. And I said, well, why do you think somebody would send their parts to have you coat them so that they could send them to their customer? Now you could fab and do it everything in one and cut your price.
Exactly.
I said, so if you can't afford to do it on what you're currently running,
right.
If it's a separate part of your business, it's different if all you are is a custom coater and that's your business, but for some of these other people looking to add that equipment, if you can't afford it or the economics don't justify it on your own, then typically it's not a good solution.
Have you found if it's easier for custom coaters to get into fabbing, or do you feel like it's fabbers that get into powder coating, or is it just half-half?
No, if you're a coater, you're a coater. I find nobody wants to go in the fabrication portion of it. And it's actually hard to find that good labor anymore. Yeah. So typically it's the fabricator looking to powder coat. And usually 9 out of 10 times, it's because they're not getting the quality or they're not getting the turnaround that they expect. Mm-hmm. I had one that called and he says, I send out 100 parts and I get 80 back. And now I can't fill my order. He said, how do you lose 20% of what I sent you? You have no clue where it's at. Or he's got to inspect them or all these other things. So oftentimes if I hear somebody that's having difficulty because they're from a pricing standpoint, again, the problem's usually not the problem because everybody's looking for the coater that they can rely on, that they can send their parts to, and they know they're going to get the turnaround that you tell them. And they can count on that because that affects their whole business. If they don't have parts, they can't assemble their things or they can't ship them out or whatever. So that's usually what drives it. Most of the guys I talk to, they don't want to get into it unless they're spending, you get the oddball that, he's spending $50,000 a month in outsourcing powder coating is like, yeah, I think we should probably bring it in.
Right. Yeah.
But for the bulk of them, it's because they don't have a choice.
Right.
So, and like I said, all I know is the guys that I work with that do quality work, they've got all the work they can handle, and pricing typically isn't an issue.
Yeah. Well, this has been so fascinating. You know so much about the industry, more than I ever thought. And I certainly appreciate you coming on. And, I know how valuable your time is. You literally are working, as you say, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. I believe it.
Well, no different than any other small business person out there, right? I mean, you put in the same hours, right?
Yeah.
And probably most of your
with this
listeners
podcast,
do too.
Absolutely. Certainly a labor of love for sure. And I love it. I love it more than anything else I do. I absolutely love the building of community that we're getting and the growth, and the response, and they're just eating up the content, and it's time for the industry to kind of divulge, to disperse information, because it's so hard to get. The forums are gone. A lot of the stuff that we had in the early 2000s is no longer available. Even just this Mr. Heater, the calculator, which I do want to talk to you after the show about. Maybe we could build something online for it. I think it would definitely help the business, the industry. But thank you again for coming on and spending some time with us today. I'm sure you'll be back. Maybe we'll talk in the future about other stuff that didn't get covered today about ovens.
We'll squeeze out time however we can. So
yeah,
no, I appreciate you asking me on. It's a pleasure. And, anybody that has questions, I'm always available,
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
So,
now, you're not on social media, but you can be reached on your website, which I'll share one more time.
Yeah, there, or, and our phone's there. You can contact me. Quite honestly, I don't have time for social media.
I hear you. I would say it would be hard to show people, people want to see the glitz and the glam on Instagram and stuff like that. How do you do that out of an oven,
Yeah, I guess the way I describe it, and again, because we're not just ovens, but you're talking powder booths and systems, and then you add robotics into it, and a lot of specialized chain. We do chain on edge systems, which hardly anybody is even familiar with.
Yeah, what is that? I've never even heard of that.
Picture a how would you powder coat an oil filter, for example?
Oh, okay.
So you support it on a spindle, and you can index it in front of the gun, and you can rotate it, spray it, and then you rotate it through the oven. There's a lot of different things you can do with that. Or a system we put in years ago, it was a liquid application, but Calphalon cookware, the gourmet cookware, we put the system in that for spraying the nonstick coating on the interior of the pans.
Mm-hmm.
And that was all done robotically. Or I could show you one of the product. This was actually a piston application.
Wow.
That was done. You can see the spindle, but we were washing it, and this is a moly lubricant that is actually silk screened onto the piston and then baked to reduce wear in the cylinder wall. So it lends itself very well to chain on edge because we can rotate it. But this one, we actually had it indexing in so that the robot could grab it in the same position every time and load it into the silk screening machine. So there's a lot of flexibility. So we get into a lot of, I call it the projects that nobody else really wants. Well, what it is, because there's a lot more engineering involved, and the big companies, the big systems houses, they're not set up to cater to that.
Right.
And if they do a project like that, it's going to be so expensive that it makes it very difficult, unless you are the automotive company or the other ones that have endless resources. But that's not real work for most of us, Yeah. We have budgets and different things like that. So a lot of times we get into that where we're handling some of the oddball stuff. And a lot of times I'll have people that call just to pick my brain, so to speak, and I'll direct them to the right. Put them in the right direction. Hey, here's who you want to talk to, or no, you don't want to do it that way. I joke around. We've coded everything from the on/off button on your car radio to 1,500-pound tractor wheels and anything in between. So if you kind of picture that envelope, it's quite a vast.
Well, you seem to have a sweet spot on a commercial customer that you can help versus some of the larger companies out there that only deal with like really huge systems and stuff that are just so expensive.
And the other thing is, I do all the design work, so you're not talking to the sales guy.
Right.
So generally, I can give the answer right away, or I can direct you to somebody that can, instead of, especially now, because, and I'm sure you're experiencing this, that talent of people with knowledge is gone. There's no younger, you get some hungry young people coming up in the business and they can have all that they want, because there's just not that, as these guys are retiring, there's nobody that really replaces them with that.
No, it's a big issue. I know that I've read magazine articles on that and stuff, and that it's not a good thing for our industry. At the same time, like when it comes to like the powder suppliers too, it's like they've got this low level sales side to them, which is the people that you have to interact ordering powder, that don't or can't answer any kind of technical questions. And then they've got these super knowledgeable guys that you can't access unless you're big enough or you complain enough or and stuff. It's just a little frustrating to talk to. And I'm talking about the larger companies, not, Prismatic Powders. They usually have someone technical there to answer. They have a technical line, not to say that they're very helpful when you do call them, because they're always pointing the finger back at you. You did the problem. You did it wrong. It's not our powders, whatever. But
which is a good point, because, like when we build our equipment, I make the customer, I need the specs from your powder supplier. I need specs from your chemical guy. I'm not going to tell you how long it has to bake or what it has to do. They have to dictate that. And then they'll say, well, who do you recommend for powder?
Yeah.
And I say, whoever is going to service you the best. Because it doesn't matter what you take, Axel Noble, whoever you want, it's the guy that's knocking on your door.
Right.
That's going to be the difference, because he's going to be there to help you. And there's some guys that are really good, and then there's some that they're just looking at numbers and they know, they read the tech sheet on it, and that's about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, we're hitting on some stuff that we could definitely talk about in the future for sure. We can just keep going on. Oh yeah. And then, but I do want to close and say thank you again for coming on. And we'll be sure to have you back on when we've got more stuff to talk about. So have a beautiful Florida afternoon.
Well, it's raining right now. We've got it. We're in our summer pattern. It rains every day for like 20 minutes, just enough to mess up the car that you just washed.
It did rain this morning. I thought it was going to be, but it's clearing up now. But it's surprisingly rainy for September around here. But anyways, all right, everybody.
My favorite month there is May. So. Oh
yeah, that's a good month to come for sure. All right, everybody. All right. Aloha.
Appreciate it. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.